The new look Vitality squad of 2022 has played in 4 tournaments thus far, and they have had underwhelming results that have completely missed the mark of what the very premise of this project is and the level of ambition behind constructing it and making the key moves that they did to acquire this specific 5-man lineup. Now, if we look at the run briefly, look, there are some elements of context to be shaded in here. Not all the losses are as bad as they initially might sound. So let's just go and look at it. Okay, so they started out in Blast Premier Spring in the group stage, which if you remember was a very forgiving format, but they were actually one of the teams that really needed it that much. Like they actually were one of the best teams in their group. They were looking pretty good actually. They were having promising results or wins. Sure, some of them BO1 against teams that people would consider good or at least interesting. Like FaZe Clan is obviously good. G2 is obviously good. They played well against EG and Team Liquid, who showed since then haven't looked as good. Obviously, Liquid's now turned it around a bit, but at the time were coming in with big rosters. Yeah, the MIBR game who really cares about that. So that actual tournament, if anything, it was the first tournament with the new lineup. You thought, yeah, some promise here, like some, yeah, they're in these matches, like they're battling everyone here. The map pool's even looking half decent, although they did only play Inferno in the group stage, remember? So they came to Katowice, one of the prestige events, one of the big events of the year. If you're a team like Vitality, by the way, this is a tournament you were built to win. You're wanting to come and win these massive tournaments and be number one. So you go there, 9th to 12th. Now, 9th to 12th on paper, that will never be acceptable for a squad like this. Even when you shade in the context, which is that, okay, so they beat Mouse Sports, all right, not bad. Still lost to Mapton, but okay, Mouse Sports is a bit tricky right now. No one knew how good Torshi would be. Turns out pretty good. But then they got smashed by Heroic. Like, I thought Heroic just looked convincingly better in this particular matchup, even though it was supposed to be a very hyped game. And I'm sure a lot of people, because Heroic hasn't made a roster move, thought this was Vitality's chance and Vitality's going to the group final. No, smashed by Heroic, okay. Still not terrible, but here's my problem. Is if you have ZywOo and you have the veterans, you're supposed to be able to put some pressure on Heroic, and they couldn't. Then they lost to Gambit in the lower bracket. Now look, anytime you face Gambit in like the second to last lower bracket, like as in like lower bracket round 2 or something. Yeah, that does feel pretty harsh. Gambit is one of the best teams in the world. Obviously now they're not called Gambit because of the whole drama going on, but they are still, again, another team that hasn't made roster moves. By the way, these teams were elite teams last year. They haven't made roster moves. They're primed to actually beat a team like Vitality. So okay, losing to them, yes, in isolation, it's fine. Heroic and Gambit are both elite level teams that had top placings last year, didn't make roster moves, very good, great cohesion, map pool, blah, 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 all the rest of it. And it wasn't on stage, so you couldn't even activate the whole like land buff that Vitality's players should get, right? That all sounds great, except sooner or later you are going to have to get wins off these teams. It's not going to be cool to just be 2-0'd by these teams. So if we're starting off, everyone gets a pass, right? It's one of the biggest events of the year, but even so, it's your first real LAN of the year. Okay, I sort of get it. So we move on then. But then comes ESL Pro League, and ESL Pro League, a round-robin format. I hate it as a format, but it does mean you're going to get a lot of play and a lot of best-of-3 players. So let's see what they're made of, right? So they beat Sprout. That's to be expected. You don't build a fucking squad like Vitality and expect them to lose to Sprout. Then they lose to ENCE. Now here's the problem. On paper, that's terrible. ENCE is a tiny org compared to Vitality. ENCE has nowhere near the money of Vitality. ENCE can't attract people like Magisk, Dupree. ENCE doesn't have a ZywOo. On paper, right? This should be like the Sprout game. Easy win for Vitality. No, because anyone who watches ENCE knows they have a veteran in-game leader in Snappy, and they have a bevy of young talents, and all you need is 2 of these guys to go off in a game, and they can win games like this on the internet, definitely. And they did, as you saw in this group. So they got 2-0 by ENCE. Okay, that can happen. I do think they're a dangerous dark horse. Then they lost to Furia. Furia made roster moves, but their roster moves gave them even more firepower. And you know what? Right now, this is going to be a problem you're going to find out with Vitality. They don't have firepower. And ZywOo's playing like trash. So, compared to his standards, obviously. Now, Furia beats them as well. Sure, 3-map series. Then they played FaZe. They got 2-0 by FaZe, which, if you remember, meant Vitality was already out. They couldn't go to the playoffs, but FaZe actually needed Vitality to beat Outsiders and go really hard. And they did. Outsiders, basically Virtus Pro, was beaten by Vitality 2-0 when it didn't matter for Vitality, but it did matter for VP, Outsiders crucially. So actually, that's a big win. That's a very legit one. I think Outsiders is a very strong team, especially on LAN. Tricky team to play against. They've got some very strong firepower. That's a big result. The problem is, The other results in the group are quite concerning. Like the idea you're losing 3 best of 3s in a row, yes, in a shit format, but to teams where it's like Ents on paper you're supposed to be. Furia should be right there with you right now. Sure, FaZe has just won Katowice, blah, 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 but like you should at least be mixing it up with FaZe. So this is the problem with Vitality as a team. Like the results aren't coming. Even when you put in the context, it still isn't good enough for what the project's supposed to be. And this is the key thing. This is not a team that it's okay to be top 10. This isn't a team, by the way, where it's cool to be like, yeah, we're 4th or 5th. Yeah, we don't win, but like we're still pretty good. No, this is a team built to win. This is a team where the point of the upgrades was to win. You were already right on the cusp. Now you want to win everything and you want to supersede a Na'Vi type team. By the way, we don't even know if that team will exist in the current composition in the future. So this is even your chance wide open to just take the whole scene. They then played one more tournament. Because they're out of Pro League and they're going to be without some tournaments for a while, they played in the Pinnacle Cup 3, and if you know how that tournament works, just like a whole load of those snow sweets and all that, what they do is they have a bazillion teams play them through all these Swiss systems. Then when they get to the final bracket, they let big name teams come in from the quarterfinals onwards and play against them. So for example, teams like Gambit last year, Virtus Pro last year, these sorts of squads, and some of the small teams, obviously the Copenhagen Flames of the world, they would all be in these tournaments, right? Especially the teams who aren't all the big partners. So believe it or not, Vitality as an org, it's actually a little bit embarrassing you'd enter this tournament, but they did, and they got eliminated immediately in the quarterfinals because they played against Skada, the team from, I don't know if it's Skade or Skada, the team from Bulgaria. If you remember, it's got Bubble and fucking Dreamer, who, by the way, since way back in 2015 in the bloody GG play days, those guys have always been good. Bulgarian player. The joke is, now that everyone knows CIS is really good, the next group is Bulgarians on the internet, because the Bulgarians on the internet are fucking ruthless when you play them. They will fuck you up in qualifiers, in these kinds of tournaments. You think they're not that good, because online you might beat them. Online they'll get you, mate. And so they got them 2-0. And what do you know? Skada had more firepower than Vitality did. Skada had a few players that looked better than ZywOo. So, I'm sorry, you look at the totality of what Vitality's done so far, this is looking disturbing. You even look at the map pool. Remember, they've got one of the greatest coaches. Most people say the consensus greatest coach of all time, Zonic, behind them. They've got ZywOo, they've got major winners. This is supposed to be the time, right? You look at their map pool. They've had, yes, sure, they haven't played loads of maps. I mean, how many have they played so far? Let me think, what was it? Wasn't it something like 26 or 28 or something? It's not tons and tons of maps. I think it was 26 or 28. But you would expect that their map pool would be good, right? That they'd get rolling. Think about how Carrigan comes in with his teams and gets a map pool together like he did at Katowice, and suddenly you can play across a series and veto against someone. Right, here's the problem. In the map pool, you will find one really positive sign if you're a fan of Vitality and you hope this project succeeds, and that is the map Inferno, which seemingly everyone plays. It's very rare to permaban from any team in its history. It's usually weirdo like North America or fucking Asian teams that do that ban. This team is very good on Inferno, actually. I actually think if you go look across their games, this is a map they really understand and have some level of comfort on. Like, not only are they 7-3 on the map, they've beaten Virtus Pro, they've beaten Furia, they've beaten G2, they've beaten FaZe. These are all teams that can play this map. Like, these are all teams that you expect to see on this map. Then you look at their losses, they're either against teams that are very good, or they're against teams where it's like super close, or it's an OT loss. Like, actually, their Inferno looks legit. They're Dust 2, they're 4-2 on. But then the whole map pool falls apart after 1.5 maps, essentially. Because on Nuke, they're 1-2, and the one win was against Mouse Sports. It really gives a fuck in the grand scheme of things. 1-1 on Vertigo. Vertigo used to be a very good map once upon a time for this team. Their win was against Mouse Sports in overtime. This is Mouse Sports has made a player change now. Then on Overpass, they've just lost both times. And then on Mirage, they have lost it all 5 times they have played it. And it is a map that, especially recently, people just directly pick into them because they know that you will beat Vitality if you play them on it. By the way, that used to be a map ZywOo used to fucking style on. They used, because it's such a great individual map, it used to be a fucking monster on that map. They don't play Ancient because it's just the map they've chosen to get out the map pool. So where's the map pool? Like, where are we heading here? You can see this team has some real limitations right now. They haven't got together. So the key thing about this video to me is, again, it's context. You have got to look at what the concept of this team was. This isn't a team like Ents adding a player, or OG like, oh, can we still do something even though Lexi be left? You're going for the absolute top spot. Vitality in this scenario are supposed to be Real Madrid, fucking AC Milan. We're talking like, I guess in this case, Manchester City. They're supposed to be like the best and biggest orgs and teams in the world, and the absolute ceiling is where they're supposed to be going, the top of the game, and that's why they made these massive plays. They already had a canny little cool squad that had some nice team play, played around the superstar well, didn't have quite a firepower, but still was solid, could mix it up, could come second, third. When Na'Vi didn't attend, they won the IM. Yeah, we get all that. They're going for everything now. They're going for, in theory, majors. That's why they brought in Magus and Dupree. Those guys who are chilling in their career. They've got stay at Astralis to get the fucking bag. So you think of the concept. They had an elite team last year by the end, once we got to the land portion. They had the top 8 at the major, and that's only top 8 because they lost to Na'Vi. You look at how they played. They could maybe have beaten some of those other squads in the round of 8. Now, sure, the reason they weren't playing some of those other squads because they were dodgy as fuck in the Swiss system, but that was at the beginning, and they got rolling, and eventually they did sneak past some of the games that almost eliminated them. Then you had Blast Fall, where they were a top team. They were looking very, very good. You had IM Winter that they won when Na'Vi didn't attend. Sure, you had the whole thing with like no device in NIP, and G2 fucked up their part of the bracket. Yeah, we get all that, but they still did win the tournament. Then you go to the Blast World Finals, they're in 3rd because they're behind Gambit and Na'Vi. That's totally fine, still very good. So by the end of the year, you look at the last sort of quarter of the year, realistically, they were probably the second best team. It's between them and G2. I might have even given them the nod, like eye test in the server. I thought a lot of G2 was basically around Nico, whereas actually I thought they actually played stylistically around ZywOo better in Vitality in that squad. The problem is, though, this is why I don't like people going, you should have stuck with that squad. Like, nah, that's what I don't buy, though. Because when you had ZywOo in the form he was in, and you look at, like, the lack of other good pieces that could have done much more, I already thought Apex, like, overperformed at that time. Like, Masuka was half decent. Like, ochs, yeah, he wasn't awesome, but he could still give you the odd clutch or two. Like, that team, listen, Kyojin was terrible, but aside from that, like, there was some canny elements to that team, but it clearly didn't have the pieces you needed and didn't deserve to be the team that Vitality is represented by and ZywOo is represented by. Even though I did think ZywOo and Extaz are world-class pieces, and Apex probably one of the better IGLs, right? So here's the issue. It wasn't going to be good enough. And there were other moves coming for other teams. And even Vitality, from as soon as they got eliminated from the major, it had been announced in terms of leaked to websites that they were going to make this roster move themselves. And that's the reason why you don't tunnel on the lineup that they had at the end of last year. Because the X factor to their whole run after the major, where all the great results came, was knowing that that lineup is not going to exist, that is the last dance, bringing everyone together, forgetting about the small stuff and the little mistakes, because you know you're not going to be playing with that guy in a few months, just having a good upbeat mentality, doing the best you can, firing every shot, going out blazing, and then seeing how you do. And you know what? They did pretty well. But the scene was about to level up. The scene has leveled up. Sure, we don't know what's going to happen with these CIS squads. And quite frankly, I think last year's Vitality, it would be a canny squad now, but it would be like the 6th or 7th best team, I think, in a month or two. So they had to go for a gamble. The question is this the right gamble? Because essentially, because of that, like, knowledge in the back of the player's mind that it wasn't going to continue, I don't think you can actually fairly look at that land period and then now and test, like, A/B test, like, look what it looks like to have Extage and to have ochs and then to have Zonic. And I don't think that works because of this knowledge that they actually had of that. So this is a massive gamble to bring in these big name players and to even cut people like ochs. And a fucking coach, someone who's a contender for best coach in the world in Extaz, you're cutting this guy. And for who? Someone, by the way, in Zonic, who you have to go back to 2020 when we're online, when his teams were pulling out big, impressive results. Yeah, you had the Cologne run in 2021, but everything else was a nightmare. And you wouldn't want to mention those lands the way that year ended. That was a fucking joke. So, and who gives a fuck about that Blast 4 result, by the way? You're just cheating. Just what? Now, when they make this move, think about it, right? You have a French team, speaks French, culturally French, organisation's French, your superstar is French, and your star coach is French. And those are your 2 best pieces. So the gamble here is we're going to give up being a French team, we're going to give up speaking French, we're a French org, but that's going to be irrelevant. Our superstar's still French, but he's going to speak English, and we're going to let that amazing coach go, and we're going to bring in majority non-French. Now, people might think, how do you mean, though? They only brought in 2 players non-French. No, because they brought in the coach as well. So they brought in 2 Danish pros, by the way, who've won multiple majors playing their roles. So they're going to get their roles. Then you bring in Zonic as your coach, who is famous for having a full system, full spectrum approach to coaching from top to the bottom and having the most agency and power of maybe any coach ever, to our knowledge. And he's coming in and he doesn't speak French. He's not culturally French. He's going to come in and they're not even going to be doing his natural language of Danish. It's going to be English. You're switching to English. It's a gamble for everyone involved because it's not ideal for anyone, is it? Like, think about this. Even though you're going to think, well, that's it right there, right? How can they be expected to perform up to par? No. Because do people give that leeway to Nico? Played his whole career outside of his fucking region in multinational squads where he's speaking his second language, 2 other people speaking their second language? What about someone like Guardian, who did the similar thing, had to speak Russian in a team where Russian wasn't his first language? What about my boy Carrigan leading all these FaZe Clan squads? Meanwhile, he's being compared against people like Glaive, who were just staying in their home country, their home tongue, their home fucking organisation, pretty much, and getting all the benefits. Exactly. No one gave them their leeway, right? So I do give them some leeway because I did. But I think it's a pretty unfair standard people are judging them by. It's going to be harder. But that also means, by the way, if you accomplish everything greatness and go to the top like Carrigan and FaZe almost did, it counts for more for you, in my opinion, than when someone does it with the advantages, let's say, or not the disadvantages. So this means, by the way, now you have a culture shift as well, right? Remember, Vitality was a squad where I could imagine they weren't the most crazy, diligent practice team. They looked like they did their job, like Stars called the shots, etc. But they're French, like the French, culturally and stereotypically, they are a bit more lazy, or rather, they just like leisure time. They like the idea of having fun. They like the idea of playing when you feel like it and not playing when you don't feel like it. Then you look at Astralis. Astralis is probably the most legendary practice team of all time. These guys were burned to a fucking crisp because they were just too good at the games. They would go too far in the tournaments, and then they would just practice night and day when they were back home. Then you consider emotionally. Okay, so you have the French that are way up there. You have Apex going, what, sacre bleu. Like, you never really says that, obviously. You're going nuts, doing all that crazy shit for the camera that you all know. Then you go and you look at the Danes. The Danes famously, they're like nailed down, like unless you're angry at something, which is the rare time they seem to spiral a bit. Aside from that, it's about like keeping an even keel, not getting too emotionally up and down. Like, each round is a round, don't worry about the outcomes, do the correct play, make correct decisions. So to me, the contrast there is enormous. You're gonna have to find some common ground or pick one of the approaches. You even look at the playing style. Astralis was the most measured, controlled, like you're going off like calculation, you're using set pieces, incredible communication, like drawing the game out, playing at a slow pace, punishing enemies for mistakes and misrotations. Then you think of Vitality, they had a more limited squad, and Apex used to be a fucking entry fragger, so they were much more of an up-tempo team, fast, attacking Counter-Strike, play around ZywOo, play off his picks and his kills, put him in position to win rounds, make decisive calls like that, because you don't have the best team, so you've got to use like speed and timing, and I would even say intuition to make your reads. To me, again, the contrast is enormous. Even the whole slow versus fast style, I think, is a massive change for these teams. So then you add in as well, it might feel like, well, they kept 3 players in terms of the Vitality squad, so they've got a core. No, because in terms of what the core of the team was, yes, Apex and ZywOo was part of the core in Vitality, but was Masuta really the rest of the core? Was that like the structure of the team? Even if he was, the problem they now have is Zonic's the coach. And as far as I can tell, if you look at their team and you look at some of the interviews, it sounds like what he's done is come in and start slowly implementing his way of seeing the game. And he's immediately put Dupree and Megaskin to the kind of positions you'd expect them to be in. And now it's actually the core, people like Masuta, Apex and ZywOo, who look out of position or look like they're not integrated or they don't understand what's going on. They're not on the same page, again, stylistically, emotionally, language-wise, comms-wise, everything with these Danish players. So I think it's a lot harder. This isn't the implementation people think. This isn't like VP or FaZe having an existing core and just adding another good piece that looks like an upgrade. That's a much easier change to make. This is more akin to what they did in G2, where they stripped out key elements, put other elements in, and you have to make a brand new squad. The problem is G2 hit the ground running really quickly in that sense. Vitality is looking like they are still months away from this lineup properly coming online. And then let's get to, I could have led with this, the whole video could have been about this, but I think it's a symptom of what's going on in the team, and that is that ZywOo is playing arguably the worst Counter-Strike of his entire professional career, which obviously has been it's just over 3 years long now. And he doesn't look like he's comfortable. He doesn't look like he fits with these teammates. And before that, he used to always be a stud. Yes, he had those periods where he sometimes not like great. So here's the problem, though. People already assumed he was going to be incredible. People already had him penciled in as a top 3 player in the world. They just assumed that wasn't even something they had to be concerned with. And it turns out it is something. And so you know what? People just assumed, just like Simple, just like Nico, he is so incredible, he can play with any teammate, in any system. Remember, Simple and Nico went abroad even. And he will just frag out and have the same numbers, and it just shows that like super duper god tier players do what they do anyway. And how they interact with others is just whether they win the championship. It's not how good they are individually. Well, you know what? That hasn't proven to be the case for ZywOo so far. And actually, ZywOo doesn't seem to have responded to roster moves initially that well either. It seems like it takes some time to get comfy and to get his place in the team again. I don't know if he sacrifices for them. I don't know if he, like, it's just a bit off because he doesn't speak in French now and the comms have affected him. Who knows? Now, here's the thing. The assumption is, with this team, it's all right. It'll get figured out eventually. With a team this good on paper and a coach like they have and the pieces they have, might take you a while. Might take a innovation in terms of how you construct the squad. You might need to change up the culture or the philosophy of it. But eventually you'll get there, right? Because you got the pieces, which you do. So let's look at those pieces, because that's also trickier. Like, people are taking the name value of these players, and some of it hasn't shown in the server yet in the way that it would need to for this to be a super team, which goes like this. So on paper, it looks great. You got ZywOo. He's going to be a top 3, worst case, top 5 player in the world, right? Sounds great. There's our superstar player taken care of. You've got Apex, one of the better IGLs. At least we thought so from last year's team on LAN. Looked pretty good in all those fucking calls they were making on T-side. You got dupreeh, Mr. Reliable throughout CSGO history, along with his boy Device, but as the second star. You've got Magisk, who's gradually getting his groove back together, clearly a smart player, played a bunch of roles, once upon a time was a major MVP. And then you have Masuta, who they would say in this team, like, yeah, he'll have to find his role a bit, but you know, he was like improving over last year, and he started to look like he was a half-decent entry player, and yes, he was getting used to land player, but he seemed like gradually, he was improving, and it was worth the gamble to see how he'd do in the next 3 to 6 months like they did here, right? You can't spend all the money on everyone. The problem is the reality of these players. Okay, so it was 28 maps that they've played so far with this lineup. ZywOo is having big issues. Let's just start with the stats here, boys. So this is ZywOo in 2022. So you look at this. Only a 1.17 HLTV rating. He used to be a monster in that category. Deaths is alright. KST's okay. Firepower, amount of kills has gone way down. ADR's gone down. Impact's gone down. That's him thus far in 2022, right? Most people, statistically, would say the best year of his career, obviously, was 2019, the year he became the number 1 player in the world, right? Let's go look at that. Now, this is online and LAN, remember, all of it. 1.32 rating, similar deaths, similar KST, higher ADR, much higher impact, higher kills per round, just a much better player. You go to the bottom, 1.2, what is that? 1.26 against top 5 opponents, 1.28 against top 10, 1.27 against top 20. Go back and look at that in the 2022 one. 0.96 against top 5 opponents. And then you go to top 20, 1.04. It's not even that they're just playing top teams here, guys. How about look at 2021 on LAN when ZywOo was again in incredible form. It looked like a monster, right? So on LAN, 1.31 rating, 1.40, like basically very similar stats. The thing about ZywOo is like simple. When he's on his game, his stats are just incredible and they seem to just hold throughout his career, throughout years, through metas, through teammates. But he's having his issues, right? Now, true, he has had slow starts in the past. He had the odd tournament that was a bit dodgy in the beginning of 2020 with the whole Alex swap in and out eventually. Then you had, obviously, in early 2021, the team reformulated, and then they had to have Apex as the IGL, and even though like they were having dodgy results, like he was having like up and down performances. He'd have a tournament here and there, and a series here and there that were really shit. Then he'd like sort of level off and be really good again, but he wasn't like the best. And then like more like towards the summer, he got really good, and then by the end of the year, yes, he was a real contender for number 2 and number 3 in the world. That was legit. He wasn't for number 1, but for number 2 and number 3, yes, I think that really was the case. He was a very strong player, and on LAN, he looked fucking awesome at the end of the year. But let's consider this. It ain't just slow starts that have been a pattern of ZywOo's career. There's also that he's had issues at big events. Team-wise, massively so. It's only really ESO1 Cologne in 2019 that he had the big result at. Aside from that, his team's always underwhelmed at the major / prestige events, and individually he's also had some underwhelming performances there, and one of them thus far this year was Katowice. Obviously Katowice typically hasn't been a good tournament for him throughout his career, so okay, that's a problem because everyone already had him checked away as, well, he'll be a top 5, top 3 player in the world, no problem with that. Let's go to the rest of the team. No, we have to start with the star player, and he isn't there right now. They don't have a superstar player right now on Vitality. Then you go to dupreeh. Now dupreeh started great, but he's dropped off heavily since then. Like, you have to ask yourself, right? Age. He's had years and years and years and years in the game as a top player now. He's been a top 20 player on HLTV for like more than half a decade at this point in time. Does he have the drive for it still? Yes, he might have wanted to change team, might still want to win, but is he as driven as when he didn't have majors, or when he had one major, or when he wanted to go back-to-back with Australis, or wanted to win a Grand Slam? Who knows? I can't know that. I can't know after people have been online for a couple of years and had spotty amounts of lands, and now that we're in a new climate where who the fuck knows who's on these teams and how good they are and what the moves are. I don't know where this guy's head is at. This isn't the same world we were in 2019 with the permanent land circuit going back decades, and where we kind of knew the environment, as it were. So I have my questions. Now, he is so reliable and has been so excellent throughout his career. I would say, actually, just like I expect ZywOo to become a superstar player again after some tweaks and some time, I expect Dupree to become a better player. But with that said, though, I am going to shade in now that when he was in Australis and they were really good, when they got really good again in the latter part of 2020, he was a good player, but even then his stats had dropped off before and he wasn't as sick a star type player. And in 2021, I thought he was quite underwhelming, actually. He was okay. He was one of the better parts of Australis, but Australis wasn't a very good team, and they weren't doing anything relevant, and he was nowhere near a top 10, top 15. I don't think he was anywhere near a top 20 player for me last year. So I don't know if that's where he is at in his career. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He was so great in the past and had a great work ethic. Let's see where he's at now. Then we go to Magisk. We aren't out the woods yet, boys. He's been decent, but he's nowhere near the monster that won an MVP at a major in 2019 at Katowice. No way. Now, I will say, he has been through a lot of different things himself. He was the IGL for a few tournaments they won in Australis. Sometimes it looks like they don't allow him to play the kind of roles he played years and years ago, or sometimes he was maybe sacrificing for the people, or to bring in people like Bobsky and Lockie and all that, and who the fuck knows, and when Glaive and Zipniks were in and out of the lab. It does seem to me like he maybe got lost in the mix a little bit, and he hasn't been the great player he was years and years ago. Now, here's the thing. I have a minor concern there, because the upside of Magisk to me is this. If he never does become a top player again, I mean, he still has like raw spray, he still has skills, clearly. If he never becomes a top player again, luckily he is versatile, as we've seen over the last few years, so you could do something with him. You could make him your IGL if you need to, if it doesn't work out with Apex and Zonic's still your coach. You could potentially move him to like a supportive type position, just put him as your support player. By the way, I think there's a trend you should look for in the future. I think what you will find in the future, because it happened with people like NBK, is I think in the future, the people who are really good, like semi-lurk type players, and also players, in my opinion, where their strength is spraying. I think these players, as they sort of like their raw skills degrade and their performance level relative to their peers isn't as good, I think they will transition from being stars, just like MBK did, to becoming the support players of tomorrow. Because with the experience, the raw spray they have, and the fact that they've been in different roles and teams, I think they'll be people will be ideal for this position. So I think people like Magisk, Elige, I know Valde, like I said, NBK did it in the past. Like, these are the players I expect to become tomorrow's support players and maybe be like the OP, super experienced support player in that sense. So we'll have to see, but that doesn't help you today if you've got Magisk. Then you look at Apex. He's not as good as he was in the team last year. He's fine. But if in-game leader's an issue, like we haven't implemented the system yet, isn't that a question to ask? And then you got Megas sat right there, so there's a little bit of awkwardness behind the scenes in that sense. I think Masuta's had problems with this lineup, but then again, he would sort of be the least of my problems with all the other things I'm trying to fix. If I'm Zonic and if I'm the Vitality org, we can worry about him after the fact. And I'm sorry, he will always be the most obvious name to put on the chopping block if you need to. If you need to switch something up, like for example, if, as we hear, like the VP team might be for sale, well, why the fuck aren't I going to get your Kindar tomorrow? Like, the guy speaks English anyway. Like, I would get this guy immediately. That would be an incredible addition to this team. Could make you very good immediately. Because I watch this team, and one thing I do think to myself is this. I don't watch and go, wow, if only Shocks was in the team. But I do watch and go, I tell you what, we missed those odd, like the one or two clutches it felt like Shocks he was always good for in a BO3. Like, those really could have made the difference in some of these maps. And they don't, for me, have someone who currently sort of fills that, I wouldn't say role, but like, essentially is able to cater to that responsibility within the team and add that to the mix. So when you actually come off paper and look in the server, it's pretty dark because we lack a true superstar right now. ZywOo isn't up to snuff. The overall firepower clearly is lacking. Just go look at some of these games. Then you consider they had lacking firepower in the LAN team at the end of last year, but they had like a nice canny little style. They knew their timings. They were all on the same page. This style is wonky as fuck. It's not efficient at all. So they have identity issues across the board and as a team. And then as a team, they have communication issues, it looks like. They clearly have like chemistry/synergy issues. I think this is a way trickier initial hump than people realised. If you contrast it with what G2 had to do, the thing with G2 was, as long as Alexi B worked out and Nico was really good, that would have been enough to put you in good position. And you look at FaZe Clan, it was already bringing in Rops. He's already worked with Carrigan. It was a slam dunk. These teams, if they were going to be good, would be good within the first month or two. Vitality is an enormous project where you're essentially putting two different halves of totally different projects together and trying to make them into one thing, speaking a different language, different culture, different philosophy, and still having the Zonic be the fucking ZywOo whisperer and keep this guy mentally in the right frame and performing at an unbelievable level, way better than normally people should even have to play. Oh, this is a much trickier concept than people realise. So I think eventually that this will be a good team, but will it actually be a number one team? The more I've watched it now, the more I have to ask, because I even look conceptually. It isn't even conceptually the perfect team. Like, you have no obvious second star. You'd go, what about Dupree? Yeah, but he hasn't been it for years and years at this point in time. You have no great in-game leader. You've got Apex and you have Megaskin the Wings, but they ain't Glaive, Carrigan, they ain't these guys. Then you go and you look, you don't have you did on paper have a superstar, but you haven't thus far. Okay, having a superstar like ZywOo, that is a great building piece. You do have a great coach, Sonic. Those are two great building pieces, but you can see, you think of the great building pieces like superstar player, second star, IGL, coach. You've only got two, and quite frankly, the two that you have don't look like they're manifesting in terms of ZywOo isn't carrying, and Zonic thus far hasn't figured out the problem, hasn't got the solution, right? Then you've got to add in the whole French issue. Right, ZywOo has to be the number one priority for this org because he is so good at his peak and for so many years already that you cannot allow him to be limited by this team. He could be stats-wise a bit lower down, but he has to be the best player and one of the best players in the world. Otherwise, it feels like the project is actually inhibiting your largest asset, which is ZywOo, who's on a multi-year deal. He's going to be the face of your team for years and years. And you know if you build around him right, in theory, you could be number one. In theory, like I said, we don't know what's going to happen in the big tournaments. He hasn't had the results, guys, minus the LSL1 clone 2019. I'll probably do a video on it soon. Remember, they also, for this French issue, gave up Xstars, one of the best coaches in the world, to get Zonic. Now, the reason I bring all this up is, when in 3 months, 6 months, after the major, maybe 9 months, if this team hasn't been a consistent top 3 team, hasn't been winning titles, hasn't really gone hard for that major, if there are any of these identity issues, this might sound wild because you could never conceive of it. But despite the fact this is a new project for Zonic, you would have to, as Vitality, consider two things. One, switching back to French to make ZywOo more comfortable. And then two, because two will be connected, fire Zonic. That is a real thing that one day might be on the table. I don't think it is now and it shouldn't be now, but that has to now be shaded in a way you wouldn't even have thought of that going into this project if this was like a mouse sports team, just because of what you know previously about ZywOo and the French culture of the team. So, like I said there, I'm putting the expectations very high for this team. I think this team has to be a top 3/contender team. It has to... Doesn't have to win the major, because even some great teams didn't win the major, but it has to come close. It has to look like it can win the major. I think you look at G2 and Vitality. You're looking at Na'Vi having Simple, having all that team around him, going undefeated at the major, winning the Grand Slam, looking like they're going to have an era. You're supposed to, as Vitality and G2, go, but I've got a Simple, I've got Nico, I've got ZywOo. Wait a minute, we need to do him, our star, like Na'Vi did with Simple. We need to put the pieces around him. This is the time to spend, and this is the time to let our guy, who's already amazing, go to the top, and let's see who's better out of Simple, ZywOo, Nico. Let's have a true battle of the superstars. You need to be in position to win it all, to win the major, to win the Grand Slam, to have an era, to potentially have your guy be number one in the world. There was a super team vibe around making this team, and that is what it is supposed to be. Now, the notion goes, it will work out eventually. Now, I think it will anyway, because I think, as I said with Masuta, you could obviously just make a player change. Anyone who speaks English can join this team. You have the money, your Vitality. You've already got the sunken cost fallacy. You've already spent all the money on Zonic and Megas and Dupree, and you've got ZywOo on that years of contract. Apex is loyal, in theory, so why not just fucking spend? Or, this lineup works out, it gets better and better. As time goes on, they have 2, 3 maps. Maybe they get good on Dust 2 and Nuke next. And then you actually have the pieces for a map pool. And then over time, the fragging improves. Some Raj isn't as much of a big deal. You can see where ZywOo gets back to being a top player. This thing can fix itself. And I actually think as long as ZywOo gets back to being a top 3 or 5 player in the world, the others don't even have to add that much more firepower. But then you've got to get the structure in place and have some canny tactics and a nice bit of communication and synergy. So the thing is, I do actually expect still, with the pieces they've got, the money, the time, the coaches, production staff. I think they will get this together. I don't know if it'll be for number one. Like right now, that's the suspect part to me. But right now, I think this has started maybe even slower than I expected. I expected this one to take a few months to wind up, but it doesn't even really look like they've truly gone beyond step one for me. This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, William Peyton Lacy, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to take part in a lengthy donator discussion with me. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skilluminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.